Okay, good morning. I guess this would be morning. With me today, we have Jerry Stordahl, and we have Sydney Gates, and Nathan Bilyeu. I'm Rob, and we're going to be talking about some concepts regarding whether God is worth it. We're going to start with a few interesting questions, and we're going to start right with Jerry.
Oh boy.
That's right. Religious rhetoric aside, in your experience, what do you feel God wants from you in your life?
Well, I think he wants me to be available, to be able to love the people who are in my, I guess, sphere of influence, which that could change on a daily basis. To be able to reflect him. You're looking at me with a blank stare.
No,
There's
no, no.
more.
I'm thinking I think you just knocked it out of the park, Jerry. I'm going to put Sydney on the spot and say any follow-up, any additional thoughts you might have on what you sense God really wants from you in your life.
Where I'm at right now in my life, I just really think it comes down to loving others and everything that you do. So whether that be through your job, through your family, just whatever. I think just loving others is his main idea.
Super. Nathan, your thoughts?
I think they nailed it.
No.
Yeah, I don't have much more to add to that other than I just think that what God is looking for us is to, in some way, play that role that Christ played of seeing that person in the crowd, that woman, that man in the crowd that no one else is seeing, and asking the questions of what can you do to make them feel valued.
Okay. And has your perception of God's expectations for you, has your perception changed over time?
Yes.
In what way?
I remember the end of my senior year of high school, sort of reflecting, being asked to reflect at when I graduated, what, was I proud of, who I was as a Christian. I remember thinking back and being able to count 3 times that I had used swear words out loud and thought, yeah, that's pretty good. I think I've made it as a Christian. One time was during a football game, one time I had acid in my eye, and the other time was over a girl. And those are get out of jail free sort of swear events.
Oh,
so,
free pass. Buddy.
right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's matured beyond sort of a legalistic understanding.
Okay. Yeah. Sydney, any thoughts in that regard?
Pretty similar. When I was growing up, my religion was mainly really rule oriented and just, checking off the boxes, making sure I do everything right, everything that I thought God would want me to do. But
Yes.
I guess now it's more, my perspective has broadened. I think I'm realizing it's not just about that. It's about how you treat people, and what God would want you to do is not necessarily just checking off a box. It's how you make people feel and just loving others. So it's definitely changed.
So that sounds like it's more of a shift from a negative "thou shalt not" to sort of, these are positive, affirmative things I can do to please God rather than avoiding displeasing God. Is that?
Yes, yeah, and instead of just thinking, oh, he has a bunch of rules for you, it's, well, now I understand why those rules are spoken about in the Bible. It's to help love others and live the best life that you can. So it's not just checking off a box. He has those for a reason. So.
Oh, super, super. Jerry, any thoughts on this one?
I think I was raised, maybe not handed, these are the rules, but they were there. And I guess I would say I feel freer now, and looking for the opportunities where somebody's in front of you that you didn't expect to see that person that day, but I just have the freedom to love them. It's not like I have to do this. It's like I have an opportunity, and you don't want to miss that.
Excellent. Super. Okay, Nathan, from what you've experienced in your life, does virtue matter?
Yes. That's the right answer, right? Yes.
Okay, we're done for the day. Thank you very much for paying attention.
Yeah, I know. I think in my experience anyway, I think virtue is necessary to have community. That people have to have a fundamental shared sense of virtue in order for you to trust somebody to manage your money on your behalf, even if it's just like the group of friends and someone's going to run down and pick up the soda or something. Like you fundamentally can't even have that if you can't trust them with the money. And then if somebody says they couldn't make it to event X that was important to you, you can't really have community unless you can trust that they're not lying to you. And
Oh, wow.
and yeah, so I think virtue sort of undergirds the ability to build everything from small friend groups to churches, communities, countries.
Wow. So the value then of virtue in an interpersonal kind of way.
Yeah.
Okay. Jerry, your thoughts?
I guess I was thinking, I don't have virtue apart from Christ. But he, hopefully, as Christ followers, learn to cling to him, and he produces those things in us. But I think there's definitely everything in me and everything in the world draws me to the things apart from virtue. So I can't do virtue apart from Christ.
Wow. Sydney, what are your thoughts?
So I'd have to say my mom is definitely the best example of virtue in my life. Just watching her, she's so loving to everyone, and just seeing how the impact she has not only in my life but those around her, that's really what comes to mind when I think of virtue, because she's just impacted so many lives. So I think it's very important, even on the global scale, but just those personal relationships, I think it's very important.
Yeah, and honestly, that's something that did not come to my mind right away, the idea of the necessity of virtue in interpersonal relationships, because I looked at it as sort of in a vacuum, almost a do's and don'ts list, but those are amazing responses. Thanks. So, has your perception of the role of virtue in your life, Nathan, has that changed over time?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think I probably used to view virtue more as like a fire insurance kind of quality. It keeps you out of hell. And hadn't maybe had thought about the extent to which that even some of the commandments in the Bible like come across as don'ts that, could easily be read as how to keep God from being angry at you. I hadn't really thought about the extent to which these are being given so that humans can build something together.
Yeah, I'm also interested, I guess, circling back to something Jerry said a minute ago, the notion of I can't do virtue apart from Jesus, which I think is an incredibly powerful statement. What were your thoughts when you heard that statement?
I don't know. I mean, some of the more virtuous people that I think I know might not even be Christians, and so but I definitely, for me, I can definitely see that, right? Like for me, there's, I think a key part to the extent which you could ask Jill, the extent to which I fail at being virtuous, but if there's any success, it probably comes from my own faith tradition. I'd certainly have really strong friendships and trusting relationships with people who I would view as being virtuous and reliable, who aren't Christians, but it certainly plays that role in my life as well.
Interesting. Okay. Sydney, has your perception of the role of virtue in your life changed over
Yes,
time?
extremely. So I just graduated high school, so I'm kind of at a crossroads in my life, I guess you could say. I'm starting to realize that I have to start thinking for myself now and make my own decisions. And so I think that coming to the realization that virtue is a big part of my life, like I have to be able to make those decisions by myself and really decide how I want to present myself to others and how I want to act. So I think it went from being told what was right and wrong and what was virtue, and I think it is gonna have to come from myself now and make my own decisions. So
as you sort it out as you navigate
Yeah.
adulthood. Right. That makes a lot of sense. Now we're going to move on to the issue of God's character in particular, particularly the notion of the interplay between God's sense of mercy and God's sense of justice. Jerry, how do you make sense of God's character in that regard?
Oh, man. I don't know. I had to look up these words in the dictionary. It's like, how do you explain that? And it's like, I guess mercy is getting what we don't deserve in the pot. His love, his kindness, and I don't know. I think like we're all big advocates for justice, but when you think about justice, it's getting what you deserve, and I don't know if I necessarily want what I deserve from God, but I don't know. I'm glad it's his role and not mine. Maybe I want mercy for me, and sometimes I want justice for everyone else, and I'm just glad I can know that, God's got it figured out, and I don't.
And that's okay.
And
Sydney.
Yeah, so kind of along what Jerry was saying, that's something I've really struggled with my whole life because I'm more of a justice person. I'm like, you get what you deserve, So mercy is definitely something that's hard for me to do myself. So I guess I've always kind of strayed away from thinking about the justice that God has given people. So I like to think about the mercy that he gives others, just because I guess I'm not good at it. So it's kind of like his role, not mine. So I'll be like, well, God can give those people mercy, and I'll give them justice. So that's definitely something I struggle with.
Not going to cross you, young lady.
Kill them all and let
Yes.
God sort it out. Huh?
Yep. Well, hopefully not. But yeah, so that's definitely something I've struggled with.
Well, then you could reconsider and go into the law and become a district judge.
Yeah.
Dispense
See.
justice. Nathan, a little variation on this question. I've heard it said that, talking about grace and mercy, that grace is bestowing gifts that we don't deserve, and mercy is withholding that which we do deserve. What are your thoughts on that?
Wow, I like it. I think it's good. It's useful to have, I think, a different words to describe two things which really are very different. I think that that definitely, like, I feel like grace is an easier concept in that everyone thinks it's fine to give somebody a gift. No one holds that against anybody. This person's generous. Mercy, thought of in this context of withholding that which you do deserve, that could actually get pretty tricky, because if you're the victim of some abuse and someone saying, well, God is merciful, so he's going to withhold the judgment from your abuser, that could be really hard to take, I would think. And I think that there would have to be a lot of work that you would have to do yourself, not with receiving mercy for yourself, but maybe being okay with mercy being given to someone else who has wronged you or hurt you, or maybe even harder, maybe someone who's wronged or hurt, your family, someone you love. Like, that gets away from the warm and fuzzies.
Sure, that makes it real, especially when you're talking about your family being wronged and your kids, and then we parents tend to bristle pretty strongly about that. Yeah, and interesting though. So let's move on to the subject of God's anger. Sydney, have you ever felt any conflict trying to resolve what we know about descriptions of God's anger, particularly in the Old Testament, with your concept of God?
Yeah, for sure. That's something that I never have really understood, because some of the things in the Bible, it's like, wow, that's pretty intense. Why would he do that? But I think that when it comes down to it, everything that God does is out of love. So I think that you just have to think about it as he wanted the best for us or whoever, and we did not do that. So he is angry because he knows that we could have done better for ourselves and for others. So I think that's kind of how I think about it, but it's a tricky question.
Oh, yeah, and it's one of the things that we, people who try to be Christ followers, that I don't know about you guys, but I hear that a lot in people I talk to that say, well, yeah, look what your Old Testament God did lowering the boom on Sodom and Gomorrah or Jericho or whatever. So, yeah, you're right. It's something that we all find pretty tricky to navigate. Jerry, what are your thoughts?
Oh. I guess I was thinking that sometimes when you want to present the gospel to somebody, you kind of almost want to leave out that part. Mm-hmm. Like, let's just focus on this New Testament stuff and say, I don't really myself know how to deal with it, because if I didn't know the end of the story, I don't think I could deal with some of the Old Testament anger of God stories.
Nathan, how do you deal with the Old Testament anger of God stories? How do you reconcile that with your concepts of God?
So that has evolved over time as well, but I think a lot of it has to do if you put yourself into the shoes of the various authors of the Old Testament, to the folks that are imputing this anger to God and some of the more extreme conduct, Canaanite genocide, and just really harsh actions. If you put that into the context of a persecuted people, a lot of the Bible was compiled after the Jews had been conquered and exiled. You could see how there would be a motive to look for God's sort of justifiable anger and wrath. Like, what are you doing? Our enemies have been decimating us. And so you would want to believe in a God that's righteously indignant about how you have been treated and about this legacy of persecution. And so I try to put myself into, I think I can have a little more grace for the Old Testament authors if I say, well, in that situation, I might have wanted to believe God was commanding that kind of conduct as well. And then I balance that with what we are told in the New Testament, that Jesus is the exact representation of the Father. And so in my mind, to the extent we see these sort of things being attributed to God that are hard to square with Jesus, I look more for explanations in the psychology of the Old Testament authors, which might be my cop-out, but the way that I currently deal with it.
Oh, that's what we see in the Old Testament may be the prophet's perception of what happens as to the extent to which God is consciously displaying wrath.
Yeah, just God reveals himself to people in their context, and what we have is sort of a record of folks' understanding of God as best they could conceptualize him given their context.
Let's talk now about, Sydney, the difference between, I assume there are times where you get angry. Do you ever get
Quite
angry?
a few, yeah. Just ask my
A
mom.
little bit of a temper there.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you see what
Not as
difference?
much as your sisters, though,
Oh
right?
no, I'm the perfect child.
Right.
Well, if it's your sister, though, then chances are we're talking about a righteous anger toward someone who's being way out of line.
Yeah.
If it's you're angry at your sister, that's the kind of thing. It would be. Sort of the righteous.
Yeah.
So otherwise, talk a little bit about any difference you perceive between anger as you experience it versus anger as you've seen it portrayed as a God thing that God is experiencing.
Mm-hmm. So my anger is pretty much stemmed from selfishness and not getting my way. So that's usually when I get angry. And I think God's anger is completely different than that. I think it's he has our best interests in mind, and so I think that's mostly why he gets angry. But I mean, that's a hard question. I'm not really sure exactly why he gets angry, but I think it stems down to I'm selfish and he's really not. So I think that's the main difference.
Okay. Jerry, what do you think? Your anger versus God's anger. Same, different? How are they different?
Oh, I think probably way different, and I'm trying to think of the most recent anger. I'm not going to reveal that, but I just want to be right, and it kind of doesn't matter if I hurt people along the way. It's like if I think what I'm doing is right and what they're doing is wrong, and I'm angry, I don't take into consideration. I really sound bad, don't I? I don't necessarily, take into consideration the other person. And I think God's anger is righteous, and I don't think he's, like, say for instance, if I was to be in a fight with my husband, and that would not ever happen, but I'm not going to quit until my point is made. And I think, God in that, his righteous anger, I mean, he wants to accomplish a good that's for everybody. So if he was mediating in that situation, it would be a level playing field, I guess.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, here's a quote, Nathan. I'm going to ask for your response. The Anglican theologian J.I. Packer, he said this about God's anger. He said that God's anger is a right and necessary reaction to an objective moral evil. What's your response to that?
I think particularly in the context of looking at Jesus as, I guess, the purest example of iterations of God's anger, leaving that might be hard to square with some of the manifestations of God's anger in the Old Testament. But I think if we look at Jesus, his anger does seem to be focused on the extent to which other people are being taken advantage of or used.
I didn't mean to interrupt. What do you see in the New Testament about where Jesus' anger, as it's documented, where is it directed?
Well, so you see direction against the religious elites at the time who are piling up commands and taking extremely stringent interpretations of commands and laying them on people, very quick to point out when folks fail to live up to that which purportedly God is demanding of them, but but not lifting a finger to actually help anybody. And okay. Those are sort of the examples that come to mind, whether it be the Pharisees or the people who are gouging folks at the temple, making money off of people's desire to get right with God. That's the sort of thing that gets him pretty hot and bothered.
Does any of this is just for the whole group? Can anybody think of an example of, say, the anger of Jesus, which manifests itself a few times we see in the Gospels, as a response to the way he himself was treated? That's probably the right answer.
Yeah, there's probably not. I think the only one that comes to mind is, wasn't there that somewhere in one of the Gospels, Jesus makes some sort of comment about how a prophet's never accepted in his hometown. That might be maybe that's more frustration. Yeah. But that might be the only thing that comes to mind. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you all for today. A lot of insight, a lot of really good thoughts, and sure do appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Rob.
you.
Thanks.
You bet.